What you're about to witness has never happened before in television history. For 25 years, Judge Judy has been the undisputed queen of courtroom television. Nobody, and I mean nobody, has ever left her speechless. Until today, Congresswoman, Jasmine Crockett just did the impossible, and the entire internet is going absolutely crazy over what happened next. This isn't just a viral moment. This is a masterclass in how to handle authority when they try to overstep their boundaries. Asterisk. If you want to see how one of America's smartest young politicians completely dismantled a television legend using nothing but facts, constitutional law, and ice-cold professionalism, then you need to watch every single second of this video. Trust me, by the end of this, you'll understand why legal experts are calling this the most important confrontation in modern television. But first, smash that like button if you're ready to witness history. Hit subscribe, because we're about to break down the most strategic verbal takedown you've ever seen, and ring that notification bell because moments like this don't happen every day. Asterisk. Picture this. The most intimidating courtroom in America. Judge Judy Sheindlin, 81 years old, worth over $400 million, sits behind her bench like a queen on her throne. For 2.5 decades, she has been the absolute ruler of her domain. Politicians, lawyers, celebrities, everyone who enters her courtroom leaves either humiliated or praising her wisdom. But today is different. Today, sitting at the defendant's table, is Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. At 42 years old, she's already made a name for herself as the Congresswoman who asks the questions that make Supreme Court justices sweat. She's the civil rights attorney who never backs down. The politician who came to Washington not to play games, but to demand accountability. The tension in that courtroom was so thick, you could cut it with a knife. The audience could feel it. The cameras could capture it. Even Judge Judy's own staff knew something explosive was about to happen. What nobody expected, not Judge Judy, not the audience, not even Crockett's own team, was that they were about to witness the most spectacular verbal destruction in television history. And it would all start with Judge Judy making the biggest mistake of her career. Asterisk. The moment Judge Judy called the court to order, you could feel the electricity in the air. This wasn't going to be a normal episode about small claims and family disputes. This was supposed to be a special episode about congressional ethics, but Judge Judy had a different agenda. Congresswoman Crockett, Judge Judy began, her voice carrying that familiar tone that has made grown adults tremble for decades. I've been watching your performance in Congress, and I have to say, I'm not impressed. The audience shifted uncomfortably. This was already more personal than anyone had expected. But Judge Judy was just getting started. You seem to think that being loud and confrontational makes you effective. But what I see is a young woman who doesn't understand how to show proper respect to her elders and betters. Asterisk now. Let me stop right here because this is where Judge Judy made her first critical error. She had just challenged the wrong person in the wrong way. Jasmine Crockett's expression didn't change, but if you knew what to look for, you could see the slight tightening around her eyes. The lawyer in her was already calculating her response. Your Honor, Crockett replied, her voice calm but carrying an edge that made everyone in that courtroom lean forward. I'd be happy to discuss my congressional record with you. I think you might be surprised by what I've actually accomplished. But Judge Judy wasn't interested in a discussion. She was here to deliver one of her famous verbal beatdowns. She had no idea that she was about to walk into a constitutional law buzzsaw. Asterisk, don't you Your Honor me in that tone? Judge Judy snapped, her voice rising to that pitch that has intimidated thousands of people over the years. I've been practicing law since before you were born. I've seen hundreds of lawyers who think they're smarter than everyone else, and they all have one thing in common. They're usually wrong. The tension in that courtroom ratcheted up several notches. Judge Judy was clearly trying to establish dominance through age and experience, using the same tactics that had worked for her for decades. You want to talk about accomplishments? I've been on television for 25 years, making more money than most politicians could dream of, because I know how to handle people like you. Asterisk, and there it was. The moment that would change everything. Crockett leaned forward slightly, her voice remaining perfectly calm but gaining an edge that cut through the air like a laser. Your Honor, I'm not sure what you mean by people like me. Could you clarify that? The question hung in the air like a live grenade. Judge Judy had walked into potentially dangerous territory, and everyone in that courtroom could feel it. The audience held its breath. The cameras zoomed in. Even Judge Judy's own production team knew their star had just made a mistake. But what happened next would prove that Jasmine Crockett hadn't just come to play defense. She had come prepared for war. Judge Judy, perhaps realizing she had stepped into problematic territory, tried to pivot to a different attack, but it was too late. The trap had been set, and Crockett was about to spring it. What I mean, Judge Judy said, her voice slightly less confident than before. It's politicians who think they can come into established institutions and change everything without paying their dues. You've been in Congress for what, a few years? And you think you can lecture Supreme Court justices and federal judges? This was the moment Crockett had been waiting for. Judge Judy had just revealed that she fundamentally misunderstood what Crockett's role actually was. And Crockett was about to deliver a constitutional law lesson that would leave the famous judge absolutely speechless. Your Honor, Crockett said, her voice now carrying the full authority she had developed through years of courtroom practice. I think there might be some confusion about how our constitutional system works. The audience could sense that something was shifting. This wasn't going the way Judge Judy had planned. Crockett wasn't backing down. She was positioning for a counterattack that would become legendary. Don't lecture me about the Constitution. Young lady, Judge Judy shot back, pointing directly at Crockett, I've been interpreting law longer than you've been alive. The problem with your generation is that you think you know everything, but you don't understand respect for institutions. And then Judge Judy delivered the line that would seal her fate. You want to know what I think? I think you're a grandstander who uses inflammatory rhetoric to get attention. Real lawyers handle their business quietly and professionally. What Judge Judy didn't realize was that she had just walked into a perfectly laid trap. By questioning Crockett's legal credentials and suggesting she was unprofessional, Judge Judy had opened the door for Crockett to demonstrate exactly how prepared and professional she really was. Crockett sat back in her chair, and for just a moment, a slight smile played at the corners of her mouth. Those who had watched her dismantle opponents in congressional hearings recognized that expression immediately. It was the look of a master strategist who had just been given exactly the opening she needed. Your Honor, she said, pulling out a folder that her legal team had prepared with surgical precision. Since you've questioned my legal credentials and my understanding of constitutional principles, I think this might be a good time to review some facts. Judge Judy raised an eyebrow, still confident in her position. After all, she had been doing this for 25 years. What facts could this young congresswoman possibly have that would be relevant here? Well, Crockett said, opening her folder with deliberate care. Let's start with something you said a moment ago about respecting institutions and handling business quietly. The courtroom was completely silent now. Everyone could feel that Crockett was building towards something significant, something that would change the entire dynamic of this confrontation. You mentioned that you've been interpreting law for decades, which is true. But I think the audience might be interested in how you've actually handled some of your most famous cases. Judge Judy's confident expression flickered for just a moment. She wasn't used to being the one under scrutiny. This was her show, her courtroom, her rules. But Crockett was about to flip the script in a way that nobody had ever dared to attempt. What happened next was absolutely unprecedented in television history. Crockett pulled out a series of documents from her folder, each one more devastating than the last. Your Honor, I've taken the liberty of reviewing some of your most publicized decisions from your time as a family court judge. Before your television career, this was completely unexpected. Nobody had ever brought Judge Judy's actual judicial record into question on her own show. The power dynamic was shifting right before everyone's eyes. What are you doing? Judge Judy demanded, but her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. I'm demonstrating the difference between television performance and actual legal analysis. Crockett replied with ice-cold precision. Since you've questioned my qualifications, I thought it might be helpful to examine yours. The audience was absolutely riveted. This had gone far beyond a typical Judge Judy episode. This was turning into a real legal confrontation between two accomplished attorneys, and only one of them had come prepared. Crockett held up the first document. This is from a 1987 case where you ruled against a single mother seeking child support. Your reasoning was that she should have made better choices rather than relying on the court system. Judge Judy's face was starting to flush. That case was decided correctly based on the facts presented. Perhaps Crockett continued, her voice never wavering. But here's what's interesting. 3 years later, the appellate court overturned your decision, noting that your reasoning showed insufficient consideration of the legal standards and inappropriate personal judgment. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Judy was being fact-checked in real time, and she clearly hadn't expected it. For the first time in her television career, she was the one being held accountable. But Crockett wasn't finished. Not even close. What came next would go down in television history as one of the most devastating verbal takedowns ever captured on camera. Your Honor, this actually brings up an important point, Crockett said, standing up to deliver what would become the most quoted moment of her career. This isn't really your courtroom, is it? The question hung in the air like a bomb about to explode. What did you say? Judge Judy demanded, her voice rising in disbelief. I said this isn't really your courtroom. This is a television set. You're not actually a sitting judge anymore. You're a television personality who arbitrates disputes for entertainment purposes. The audience gasped. Someone had just explained to Judge Judy exactly what her show actually was, and she clearly didn't like it. But Crockett was just getting started. The authority you're claiming to have over me as a congresswoman is imaginary. I'm an elected federal official. You're a retired judge who now works in television. Our roles in the actual legal and political system are quite different. For the first time in her television career, Judge Judy was speechless. Someone had systematically dismantled her authority while remaining completely professional and factual. The student had become the teacher, and the lesson was far from over. What happened next was nothing short of a constitutional law. Masterclass delivered by one of the most brilliant legal minds in Congress. Crockett remained standing, her voice calm but carrying the authority she had earned through years of constitutional law practice. Your Honor, since you brought up respect for institutions, let me explain how our constitutional system actually works. She opened her folder to another set of documents, each one more precisely chosen than the last. As a member of Congress, I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. That oath requires me to provide oversight of the executive and judicial branches, including questioning Supreme Court justices about their ethics and conduct. Judge Judy tried to interrupt, but Crockett continued with the precision of a seasoned litigator who had found her rhythm. You called this grandstanding, but the Constitution specifically gives Congress the power and responsibility to investigate and oversee the other branches of government. It's called checks and balances, and it's fundamental to our democracy. Then came the moment that would be studied in law schools for years to come. Crockett pulled out a copy of the Constitution itself. Article 1, Section 1 gives Congress legislative power. Article 1, Section 8 gives Congress the power to regulate courts, including the Supreme Court. When I question judicial ethics, I'm not being disrespectful. I'm doing exactly what the founders intended. The audience was completely absorbed. This wasn't just a personal confrontation anymore. It was a real-time civics lesson from someone who clearly knew what she was talking about. She wasn't done. Your Honor, you said that real lawyers handle their business quietly and professionally. That's an interesting perspective, but it's not supported by legal precedent. Crockett held up another document that would prove to be the decisive moment in this entire confrontation. In McGrain v. Doherty, 1927, the Supreme Court held that Congress has not only the right, but the duty to investigate and expose wrongdoing in government. The court specifically said that Congress's oversight function is essential to informed lawmaking. Judge Judy was staring at Crockett with a mixture of shock and grudging respect. She had clearly expected to intimidate a young politician, not receive a constitutional law lecture from an expert. So when I question Supreme Court justices about undisclosed gifts and ethical violations, I'm not grandstanding. I'm fulfilling my constitutional duty, as defined by the Supreme Court itself. But then Crockett shifted from constitutional law to personal credentials, and her voice took on a more pointed edge that cut through the courtroom like a blade. Asterisk, Your Honor. You questioned my legal qualifications earlier. Let me clarify something for you in the audience. Crockett pulled out her resume, and what she revealed next would leave no doubt about who was the more qualified legal mind in that courtroom. I graduated from the University of Houston Law Center. I spent over a decade as a civil rights attorney, winning cases in federal court that protected people's constitutional rights. I was elected to the Texas legislature, where I passed significant legislation. Then I was elected to Congress, where I serve on the House Judiciary Committee. The contrast with Judge Judy's television career was becoming stark, and everyone in that courtroom could feel it. My qualifications to discuss constitutional law aren't based on television ratings or entertainment value. They're based on education, experience, and the trust of voters who sent me to Congress. And then came the line that would be quoted in political science textbooks for decades to come. Asterisk. Asterisk. What came next was delivered with surgical precision that left no room for misinterpretation. You said, I don't understand respect for institutions, Your Honor, but I think what you really mean is that you expect deference to authority figures, regardless of whether that authority is earned or appropriate. Crockett's voice remained respectful, but firm, demonstrating exactly how to challenge authority while maintaining professionalism. I have tremendous respect for legitimate institutional authority. I respect federal judges who follow ethics rules. I respect Supreme Court justices who demonstrate judicial temperament. I respect television personalities who stay in their lane. Implication was clear, and the audience understood it immediately. But Crockett wasn't finished delivering what would become the most devastating and quotable moment of the entire confrontation. But respect for institutions doesn't mean blind obedience to people who claim authority they don't actually possess. Asterisk. Then Crockett delivered what would become the most quoted part of her response. The moment that would be replayed millions of times across social media and studied as a masterclass in professional confrontation. You criticize my generation for thinking we know everything, but Your Honor, we don't think we know everything. We think we know enough to ask the right questions of the right people at the right time. Asterisk. Crockett gestured to the courtroom around them, and what she said next would completely reframe the entire confrontation in a way that Judge Judy couldn't argue with. You built your career on holding people accountable, on demanding that they answer for their actions. How is what I do in Congress any different? The parallel was absolutely devastating. Judge Judy had spent decades grilling people on television, demanding accountability and straight answers. But when someone applied the same scrutiny to institutions she respected, she called it disrespectful. The difference is that when I ask tough questions, it's two Supreme Court justices who have lifetime tenure and make decisions affecting millions of Americans. When you ask tough questions, it's two people fighting over security deposits and fender benders. Asterisk. The courtroom fell completely silent. Everyone understood what had just happened. Crockett had just put Judge Judy's entire career into perspective. And the comparison wasn't flattering, but she wasn't finished. What came next would seal Judge Judy's fate and establish Crockett as one of the most formidable communicators in American politics. Crockett sat down. Wait as she delivered what would become the most powerful moment of the entire confrontation. Your Honor, you said earlier that you've been making more money than most politicians could dream of. That's probably true. But money isn't how we measure success in public service. She leaned forward, her voice carrying the weight of genuine conviction that couldn't be faked or performed. I could have stayed in private practice and made more money. I could have taken a corporate law job and made more money. But I chose public service because some things are more important than money. The courtroom was completely silent. Even Judge Judy seemed to recognize that something significant was happening, something that transcended television and entertainment. So, when you question my qualifications or my methods, Your Honor, I want you to understand something. I'm not here for the money, the fame, or the television ratings. I'm here because the Constitution requires Congress to provide oversight, and I take that responsibility seriously. For perhaps the first time in her television career, Judge Judy was genuinely speechless. She sat back in her chair, looking at Crockett with an expression that mixed surprise, respect, and maybe even admiration. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost all its earlier aggression. "Congresswoman, that was quite a response." The admission was barely audible, but everyone in the courtroom heard it. Judge Judy, the woman who had made a career of having the last word, had just been out-argued by someone half her age. What happened next was absolutely unprecedented in Judge Judy's 25-year television career. The woman who never backed down, never admitted mistakes, and always had the final word was about to do something nobody had ever seen before. I think Judge Judy continued slowly, her voice carrying a humility that shocked everyone in that courtroom. "I may have underestimated you." Crockett smiled slightly, but her response showed the grace and professionalism that had defined her entire approach to this confrontation. "Your Honor, that's been happening to me my whole career." "Used to it?" Asterisk, the courtroom erupted. The audience, many of whom had come expecting to see Jasmine Crockett get the traditional Judge Judy treatment, instead witnessed something unprecedented. They had just watched a constitutional lawyer systematically dismantle one of television's most formidable personalities while remaining completely professional and respectful. People were on their feet applauding. Others were recording on their phones, knowing they had witnessed something historic. This wasn't just good television, it was a masterclass in how to handle authority figures who overreach. Even Judge Judy's own staff looked impressed. They had worked with her for years and had never seen anyone handle her quite like this. Asterisk as the show wrapped. The atmosphere in the studio was electric. Judge Judy, clearly shaken by the encounter, offered something she rarely gave anyone: genuine respect. "Congresswoman Crockett," she said during the closing credits, "I want to apologize. I came into this thinking I knew who you were and what you represented. I was wrong." The apology was unprecedented, considering Judge Judy had built her entire career on never backing down, never admitting mistakes, and always having the final word. But Crockett's response had been so thorough, so professional, and so well-researched that even Judge Judy had to acknowledge she had been outclassed. Behind the scenes, Judge Judy's producers were already discussing how to handle the episode, knowing they had television gold, while also recognizing that their star had just been upstaged in spectacular fashion. Within minutes of filming wrapping, clips from the confrontation began spreading across social media. The show wouldn't air for weeks, but audience members were already sharing what they had witnessed. Asterisk, the social media explosion. 40 to 42 minutes, the internet absolutely exploded. Within an hour of the first clips being posted, hashtags started trending worldwide. Hashtag Jasmine Schools Judy became the #1 trending topic, followed shortly by hashtag constitutional burnout as Twitter erupted with clips and commentary. Jasmine Crockett just gave Judge Judy a masterclass in constitutional law and professional respect, tweeted constitutional law professor Lawrence Tribe. This is required viewing for anyone who wants to understand how oversight actually works. Legal Twitter was particularly excited with lawyers who had spent years watching politicians fumble constitutional questions, thrilled to see someone who actually knew what they were talking about. The memes started immediately. One showed Crockett with a stack of legal documents, captioned, "When someone tries to lecture you about law, but you actually studied law." Another showed Judge Judy's surprised expression with the caption, "When the student becomes the teacher," but this wasn't just about entertainment. Legal professionals across the country took notice of the exchange. Asterisk, the American Bar Association's Twitter account shared clips of Crockett's constitutional explanation with the comment, "This is why legal education matters." Law schools began reaching out to Crockett's office, requesting permission to use the confrontation as teaching material. Harvard Law School's constitutional law professor tweeted, "I'm showing this in class next week. Perfect example of how to handle authority challenges professionally." Federal judges, speaking anonymously, expressed appreciation for Crockett's defense of congressional oversight. One told the Washington Post, "She articulated the constitutional principles better than most lawyers I see in my courtroom." The confrontation had immediate political ramifications as well. Democratic leadership immediately recognized They had a star on their hands, and within days, Crockett was being invited to appear on major Sunday talk shows, not as a controversial figure, but as a constitutional expert who could articulate complex legal principles in understandable terms. Asterisk. The House Speaker released a statement saying, Congresswoman Crockett demonstrated exactly the kind of knowledge and professionalism we need more of in Congress. Her defense of constitutional principles was exemplary. Even some Republicans grudgingly acknowledged her performance, with one GOP member of the Judiciary Committee telling reporters, I disagree with her politics, but she clearly knows her constitutional law. That was impressive. But beyond politics and law, the confrontation represented something larger in American culture. For decades, Judge Judy had represented unquestioned authority, the stern elder, who could shut down any challenge through experience and force of personality. Crockett's response showed a new model. Respectful but informed pushback against authority that overreaches legitimate bounds. She hadn't been disrespectful or confrontational. She had simply been better prepared and more knowledgeable. Asterisk, cultural commentators noted the generational and racial dynamics at play. A young black woman had just out-argued one of America's most famous authority figures, not through attitude or aggression, but through superior knowledge and preparation. This is what it looks like when the next generation of leaders shows up prepared, wrote one columnist. Crockett didn't just defend herself. She defended the constitutional principles that make accountability possible. In the weeks following the confrontation, both women saw their public profiles change significantly. For Crockett, she went from being known primarily as a fiery congressional questioner to being recognized as a serious constitutional scholar and political voice. Speaking requests poured in from universities, legal organizations, and political groups across the country. Her book deal, already in negotiation, became significantly more valuable as publishers recognized that she had demonstrated an ability to explain complex legal and political concepts in accessible ways while maintaining her principles under pressure. Asterisk. The confrontation taught several important lessons that resonated across American political and legal culture. Asterisk. Crockett's success came from knowledge, not attitude. She had done her homework and could back up every claim with constitutional precedent and legal authority. Asterisk. Crockett showed that you could challenge authority respectfully while still making your point decisively. She never raised her voice or became personal, but she was devastating in her factual responses. Asterisk. The episode highlighted how few public figures actually understand constitutional principles, making Crockett's expertise unassailable. Asterisk. The confrontation demonstrated what new generation leadership could look like: informed, principled, and unintimidated by traditional authority structures. Asterisk. Perhaps the most significant long-term impact was educational. The episode became required viewing in constitutional law classes, political science courses, and leadership development programs across the country. Asterisk. High school civics teachers used clips to explain separation of powers and congressional oversight. Law schools used it to show effective argumentation under pressure. Political science professors used it to demonstrate how institutional knowledge could be leveraged effectively. The episode also sparked broader conversations about civic education, with many commentators noting that Crockett's ability to explain constitutional principles clearly highlighted how poorly most Americans understood their own government. The success of Crockett's approach inspired other young politicians to adopt similar strategies, with more focusing on substantive knowledge and professional preparation rather than relying on viral moments or confrontational rhetoric. The episode also changed how established figures approach confrontations with new generation leaders, making clear that underestimating them came at your own risk. Political strategists began studying the encounter as a model for how to handle authority challenges, as Crockett had shown that you could be respectful and devastating simultaneously, professional and powerful at the same time. Asterisk. Conclusion and call to action. 52 to 55 minutes in the end. The confrontation between Judge Judy and Jasmine Crockett established a new standard for public discourse, showing that respect for authority and holding authority accountable weren't mutually exclusive. Crockett had demonstrated that the most effective way to challenge overreach wasn't through disrespect or aggression, but through superior knowledge and unwavering professionalism. She had turned what was supposed to be her humiliation into a teaching moment for the entire country. The episode proved that in America, constitutional knowledge still mattered, preparation still counted, and truth still had power, especially when delivered by someone brave enough to stand up for it. Asterisk. What did you think of Jasmine Crockett's handling of Judge Judy? Did she strike the right balance between respect and accountability? This is exactly the kind of leadership we need more of in America. People who come prepared, know their facts, and aren't intimidated by anyone. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me what you learned from this incredible confrontation. And if you want to see more moments when preparation meets power, when knowledge defeats intimidation, and when the next generation shows they're ready to lead, then you absolutely need to subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that subscribe button. Smash the like button if this video showed you something new, and ring that notification bell because the next showdown is always just around the corner, and you definitely don't want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and remember, in America, the truth still matters, preparation still wins, and nobody is too big to be held accountable. We'll see you in the next video.